Hi guys, Trevor Swenson with Through the Darkness. I'm really glad that you chose to be with me today, and I'm really excited to be with you as well. My personal journey through PTSD. And I wanted to talk for a couple of episodes on my personal faith and what God and Christ mean to me personally. And the reason I want to do that, the reason I want to explain my own journey is that I think it's very, very important, and it would be very inaccurate and very inauthentic of me to go through this YouTube channel and not take the opportunity to give my personal testimony, because it is the central part of why I can sit across from you today and tell my story. I have no doubt that without Christ, without an almighty God, without God the Father, that Trevor Swenson would be no longer of this world for many reasons. And what I want to talk about specifically today is that many of us that experienced trauma in our life experience trauma from somebody in an authoritative position, a father-like position, if you will. And it may actually be a father, or it may be a person that had a position of authority over you. And I hear so often that when people have an experience with an earthly human being, a father-like figure that is horrible and traumatic and damaging and injuring, the quick and easy jump is to go immediately to, that must be what God is like. There are two perspectives that you can take on it. You can take that is what God is like, or you can take that is completely opposite of what God is like. And I will tell you that I am in the camp firmly of that is not the God that I serve and that I know. And I'm going to point out a few examples in my life that hopefully will be moving to you and may hit you in the center as to the God that I serve. And you'll have to apologize, because if I get emotional during this, they are very real tears, because He is a very real God. And He is so full of grace and so good. And I'm a walking, living example of that in spite of my PTSD. So I want to give you my perspective on God the Father and who He is to me. The first belief that I have is that I base God the Father on being exponentially bigger and better than any positive experience that I've ever had with an authoritative or fatherly figure here on earth. And let me give you the first example of protection. These examples came so quickly to me because they were so impactful, as I immediately tied point A to point B, that is who God is, and He's even bigger and more powerful than that when it comes to protection. For instance, I was at a football game. My middle son is an outstanding football player, and there was chaos on the sidelines on the coaching staff. And ultimately, my son, because of the chaos, because of the lack of communication on the coaching staff, ended up missing a play on the field. He was supposed to be on the field, which happens. And what happened immediately after that is an example of how God feels about you. And it's the opposite of what you might think. The coach immediately had him on the sideline and separated from the rest of the team and was in his face, degrading, demoralizing, condescending, loud enough to where everybody in the crowd could hear it. And as a dad, as a father, knowing my heart's son and knowing my son's heart and knowing who my son was and who he was, I slowly got up out of my seat and I walked to the aisle in the bleachers and I started to make my way down to the fence that separated the team. And it was separated by a track like so many football fields are. And I put both of my hands on that hand railing on the chain link fence. And as the coach continued to go after my son, the father in me wanted to jump the fence, push my son out of the way, and point my finger directly at the coach and say, if you're going to do that to my son, you're going to do that to me while I stand here. And as I was standing there, I didn't do it, but I had this overwhelming sense of how God must feel when he sees his beloved kids, you and me, with traumatic, terrible things happening to them in their walk in life at no fault of their own. Trauma. I can tell you that the God I know would get up out of his seat in the bleachers, walk to the aisle, and walk down to the chain link fence, and he's ready to jump it and walk across that track for you. That is the God that I know, an unbelievably protective God. He saw your trauma. He knows your trauma. He knows what you went through. And he wants to be involved in your healing. He saw what happened. He knows what happened. He knows how damaging it was. And he is a protector. My second example is when my daughter had surgery on her tonsils. And if any of you have gone through this, it's a heart-wrenching thing to go through when you have somebody who is 5 or 6 years old that really doesn't know what's happening. And when they come out of the anesthesia, all they know is intense pain and fear. And I remember my daughter crying out, "Daddy, it hurts. Daddy, it hurts." And I remember my heart breaking, literally breaking. And as I walked out of the hospital that day, and as that ran through my head, I couldn't help but think that God the Father, being the great and ultimate Father that he is, doesn't think and feel the exact same thing when he knows about our trauma, and as he saw it happen, and as he saw us cry, and as he saw us broken, and as he saw everything that we endured and all of that pain, he wanted to take that pain from us and wants to take that pain from us. That is the God, the Father, that I know. Another example is that when my oldest son was in kindergarten, there was a mix-up on who would be picking him up at the after-school care. And he ended up being there late and was actually the last person to be picked up. And I remember him being in this huge cafeteria, and he was sitting all alone at this big table, all alone, nobody around, perfectly silent, and he was just quietly sitting there. And I'm sure going through his mind was, I'm forgotten, I'm abandoned, I'm afraid, I'm betrayed, I'm alone. And as I stood in the doorway and I saw my son sitting there all alone, this overwhelming sense of a father that would give anything to take away the loneliness and to be with my child overcame me. And I look back at it as another example of God the Father that I know, because I know the feeling again that I had at that exact moment was just a glimmer of who God is. Just a glimmer. All of those examples, all of those strong, healthy, fatherly emotions are just a glimmer of who God the Father really, truly is. My last example is very personal to me because my entire life I have had and I know my brother, who's a very polished professional, has this heart as well, but I've always had a very, very soft heart for people that can't help themselves, for people that are being picked on, for people that are bullied, for people that are being made fun of. And when I was a young man, I remember being at a softball game and a group of kids ran by as I sat in the bleachers, and behind them about 15 feet trying to keep up was a young kid. Still had a big smile on his face, but had a brace on his legs, both legs, and was doing everything he could to keep up with the group of kids that were running around playing. And they obviously had zero concern for him and his disability. And I remember as a grown young man literally putting my hands to my face and tears running down the inside of my forearms as I thought of that little kid. And there's nothing that I wanted to do more than to scoop him up in my strong arms and run him to the front of that pack and carry him wherever they were going. That's the God. That's the Father that I know exists, that I love, and that I serve, and that saw my trauma, and that saw your trauma. And that is why, if there's a chance that you haven't asked Christ to be your Lord and Savior, I just gave you 4 reasons. He saved my life. He can save your life. And he wants to save your life. And I want you to know that that any glimmer of goodness in a parent or an authoritative figure that you see, any greatness, anything that you want to emulate, anything that you want to hold on to and never let go of, is just a glimmer of the God that created you, that made you, that loves you so much. And that's why it's so important to make sure that you have your spiritual household in order. He's a real God. He's a loving God. He's a protective God. He's a kind and compassionate and patient God. I've felt it. I've experienced it. He is very real. And I just ask you to think about those times. Think about your trauma. And just know that God the Father is nothing like the trauma that you or I experienced. He is so much bigger and greater. His love is too good to leave us where we're at. And I just felt it was really important for me to share those examples for you. And obviously it's a very emotional topic for me because I've been through a lot. My family has been through a lot. People have come and gone. Careers have come and gone. Battles have come and gone. But God has come and stayed. And he'll do the exact same thing for you. So I just wanted to leave you with the topic of a glimmer of God. And I want you to know that whatever experience, traumatic experience you've had with an authoritative figure in your life, whether it be professional, familial, or relational, that God is so much bigger and better than that. And he saw everything. And he loves you. And he wants to scoop you up and run you to the front of that pack. And I just ask you to allow him to do that. Allow him to do that. This is Trevor Swenson with Through the Darkness, my journey with PTSD. Please click and subscribe. Please forward this message to somebody that you think might need some encouragement, that you think might need a word of hope, that you think might need to hear these words. Subscribe, hit notify. I can't wait to talk with you further. Thank you for being with me.